The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show can also be heard on KWTF in Bodega Bay, California, KOWA in Olympia, Washington, WCRS in Columbus, Ohio, and KWRK in Fairbanks, Alaska. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you are interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email so we know you're doing it. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus new releases, and a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
This week we're sharing a conversation we had with Karrie and Niko, two folks involved in the initiative called Sabal Trail Resistance. The immediate goal of Sabal Trail Resistance is to block the Sabal Trail Pipeline, actually a series of 3 pipelines meant to run through Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, carrying pressurized natural gas. We spend about a half an hour on this episode chatting about the route, who will be affected, human-initiated climate change, the companies behind the pipeline, environmental racism, decolonization, and other related topics. More on their project can be found at sabaltrailresistance.wordpress.com and stopsabaltrail.com. After that, we're spreading a 10-minute interview between comrades at Frequenza out of Hamburg, Germany, published in English at the end of January. This is the words from their blog. The interview is about the first issue of Antipolitika, released in summer of 2016 with the topic of anti-militarism. The anarchist newspaper consists of statements and articles from ex-Yugoslavia and Greece and is dedicated towards the broader public. But first, these announcements.
As many of y'all are aware, there has been a lot of concern and fear regarding Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, checkpoints recently. Given the rising tide of overt xenophobia and racism in this country, these concerns are valid, and there has been a lot in the way of confirmed raids and detentions by ICE. However, the use of social media in these situations is something that can both help and hurt the situation, both being an effective way to broadly communicate an issue and a platform for a whole lot of unsubstantiated claims and rumors. In an effort to battle this aspect of social media use, I'd like to plug a resource that Drum put out earlier this year. Drum stands for Desi's Rising Up and Moving, and they are an NYC-based group which is, quote, a multi-generational, membership-led organization of low-wage South Asian immigrant workers and youth in New York City. Founded in the year 2000, Drum has mobilized and built the leadership of thousands of low-income South Asian immigrants to lead social and policy change that impacts their own lives, from immigrant rights to educational reform, civil rights, and workers' justice. Our membership of over 2,400 adults, youth, and families is multi-generational and represents the diaspora of the South Asian community: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Guyana, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Trinidad, end quote. They have put out a very useful resource entitled A Brief Guide for Reporting Raids on Social Media, which we will link to directly in our blog. Basically, it cautions against the spreading of unsubstantiated information and provides a step-by-step guide for what to do if you witness something. If you have a pen, the long URL to the document is drumnyc.org/hyphen-content/uploads/2017/02/a brief guide for reporting raids on social media.docx.pdf. Again, we will post this resource on our blog. To see more about Drum, you can visit drumnyc.org. Here's an announcement from our comrades at supportcrow.org. On February 4th, while supporting the No DAPL struggle, Crow, Katie Cloth, was assaulted and arrested by a Bureau of Indian Affairs officer. She was walking on a public road away from the Sacred Stone camp when she was chased down by the officer. It is believed that she was specifically targeted because of her ongoing involvement and visibility within the No DAPL resistance, which had resulted in 2 arrests on misdemeanor charges previous to this incident. Crow was also known at Standing Rock for being an advocate for creating a unified front in fighting the pipeline. Crow has been charged with violation of felony probation and is being held at Morton County Correctional Center. The probation is from a previous charge in Wisconsin stemming from an environmental protest against mining on the Pinocchio Hills in 2013, for which she served 9 months in jail. After a recent bail reduction hearing, Crow was assigned a cash-only bail of $100,000. The stipulations of the judge require that the bail be paid in full. If the full bail is paid, it is likely that Morton County would refuse to release Crow. We are currently working with lawyers and legal teams in North Dakota and Wisconsin to figure this out. Donations to support Crow will go towards paying lawyers, commissary, postage, travel for supporters visiting Crow, and or bail. Crow has stated that she wants the bail paid. We fear for Crow's safety and well-being, especially in light of her assault and the severe mistreatment other water protectors have received in this particular facility. Crow is an activist, artist, forager, sustainable farmer, biologist, and amazing person loved by many within the environmental movement. We need to show her as much solidarity and support as we can at this vital time. In Crow's own words, quote, "We must negate state repression by protecting ourselves and land bases therein. We must not give our people up and recognize that to be in solidarity with one another is more akin to the idea of harmony than unity. Harmony implies that we can all do different things within the same song and still find conclusion together," end quote. Whether you are a direct action environmental activist or simply support the No DAPL struggle and protection of the land and all of its people, join us in supporting Crow in solidarity with all things wild and free. Contact Crow's support team at supportcrow@riseup.net, and Crow is spelled with a K at the beginning. You can also donate to Crow's legal fund at supportcrow, again KROW.org. From the Anti-Repression Committee in Oakland, quote, "ARC is aware that UC Berkeley PD is circulating images of individuals who they claim are associated with the Berkeley anti-Milo protest on February 1st. They are actively seeking information about these individuals and are asking anyone with information to contact them. We want to remind everyone not to assist the UC Berkeley PD in their investigation, even if it seems like the information you give is harmless. Remember that even minor information, like identifying a witness, can be used to increase surveillance of activist communities. Police use this kind of information to map activist networks and harass them. In the current political climate, the state is looking for ways to clamp down on dissent and resistance. Let's not help them do that. Remember that you have no legal obligation to talk to police or FBI if contacted about the protest. They may try to make you feel intimidated, but you always have the right to remain silent. If you are contacted by phone, email, letter, or in person, either ignore the correspondence or tell the officer that you decline to speak with them. If you are contacted, immediately call the National Lawyers Guild at 415-285-1041 so that they can give you legal advice and also so that they can be aware of police or FBI activities. Finally, do not post or circulate the UC Berkeley PD webpage with pictures of individuals. We do not want to signal boost anything that will increase surveillance and targeting of our communities. And finally, as always, you can help support our beautiful comrades who got kettled in DC on January 20th by donating to ncj20defense.com.
In a moment, we'll be hearing some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain, but before that, we have a quick update on his dietary situation. We've just gotten word that Sean resumed eating on his 50th day of hunger strike. He's still not being given a halal diet in line with his practice of Islam, and neither are other Muslim prisoners in the state of Ohio, but he's said that the administration is considering the move. He's achieved the other demands that he was hunger striking for. If you'd like to see Sean and other adherents to Islam in Ohio prisons during this age of increasing Islamophobia be able to at least eat according to their faith's dietary practices, give a call to Governor of Ohio, John J. Wow Kasich. You can call J-Wow at 614-466-3555. That's the Honorable Governor of Ohio, John Kasich, at 614-466-3555. You can also write him via Governor Kasich, that's Kasich, 77 South High Street, Columbus, Ohio, 43215-6117. You can request that Sean Swain, prisoner number 243-205, who's being held at Warren Correctional, be allowed to eat according to his faith. And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We'll call like a what?
The whole idea of prisons and imprisonment is completely bonkers. You know, it would take a really delusional hierarch to come up with this as a solution to anything. For a time, they had me in the mental health unit, which is also used for segregation overflow. When I would take recreation and walk around, I would converse with some of the guys over in the seg overflow area through their cell doors. One of those guys goes home in 2 days. In 2 days, he'll get up and eat breakfast in prison and then pack up his property. He'll get removed from the segregation cell and get released from the fiberglass separation cage surrounding that row of cells that kept him from the other prisoners. He'll then get walked to an area to change clothes and, within the hour, get walked all the way out the front gate. He'll eat lunch wherever he wants. Now check this out. He goes home in 2 days, but right now he's at a level 3 prison in segregation. Do you know what that means? That means that according to the prison management professionals, this guy is too dangerous to be around population prisoners at a level 3, like me. They will walk him out the front gate and straight into your world 2 days from now. But today, right now, he's too dangerous to be around me, in here. So, what magical bean and fairy dust event will happen in the next 48 hours that will make this dude totally and completely free world harmless? Nothing. Nothing at all. He will be the same dude in 2 days that he is now. And to take this one step further, there are prisoners at level 1 prisons and level 2 prisons all over Ohio. Thousands of them. Those prisoners are at those lower security prisons because prison management professionals have determined that those prisoners are far less dangerous than this poor Hannibal Lecter dude behind the plexiglass barricade in the seg cell. But dude goes home in 2 days. And those level 1 and level 2 prisoners who are deemed less dangerous than him will stay locked up, maybe for several more years. So, if they're less dangerous than dude, why aren't they going home in 2 days? You see what I'm getting at? The whole thing is wackadoodle. But it gets better. Follow me here. Dude goes home in 2 days, right? So if he's fit to go home in 2 days, if he's been rehabilitated and corrected according to the sign outside of this Tilly dump, then isn't he fit to go home tomorrow? What I mean is, really, dude isn't going to do any rehabilitative programming in the last 24 hours. It's not like he'll be surrounded by rehabilitation professionals, grilling him with questions, making sure he won't get out and violate some serious societal norm, like breaking a beer bottle over someone's head in a bar brawl, or wearing white after Labor Day, or eating soup with a dessert spoon. No, none of that. For the last day, he's going to eat some prison food and pace the floor of his cell, listening to his radio and maybe conversing with his cellmate. That being the case, couldn't dude just as well go home tomorrow as the day after? Is 24 hours going to make any difference? Okay, so then why not today? In fact, in a seg cell, is this guy going to do any kind of serious introspection in the last week of his captivity? Or is he going to think about his girlfriend and flinging DNA all over a hotel room? Exactly. So isn't the last week of his captivity just a waste of time and money? Couldn't he conceivably go home a week early and not be any less rehabilitated or corrected? If that's true, then how useful was, say, the last month, or the last year, rehabilitated or corrected now than he was last year? All he's done is experience an extra year of boredom and immiseration. And if this year was useless, what about the year before that or the year before that? And if we walk it backward far enough, we have to ask, what about the day he got here? Was that necessary? Did he learn anything pro-social at all from even the first 30 seconds of his imprisonment? What was the point of him even being here in the first place? There wasn't one. Nothing in the entire universe experienced the least bit of benefit from a single second that dude occupied a prison cell. But think about this. People who have power and privilege came up with this as a solution to something it doesn't solve. And they're going to keep doing it until the Antipolitika brings everything to a crashing, grinding halt. They're going to keep applying a solution that solves nothing because they can't think of something that works. And they're not about to admit that they themselves are clueless and completely unqualified to run our world. Now, consider this. Dude goes home in 2 days. Today, he's too dangerous to be at level 1 security. He's too dangerous to be at level 2 security. And he's too dangerous to be in population at level 3. And in 2 days, security staff will walk him out to the parking lot where they themselves park their own cars. Do you know what they'd do if he tried to escape today? They'd shoot him off the fence. They'd kill him deader than Elvis. You know what they'd do if he tried to escape tomorrow? Yep, they'd shoot him off the fence tomorrow and hand his remains to his girlfriend. Duct tape in the shoebox. His remains in the shoebox, not the girlfriend. Do you know what they'd do on the day of his release if they came to serve him his last prison breakfast and he was gone? They'd hunt him down and shoot him. But an hour later, they'd walk him out to the parking lot, chatting about sports or barbecue grill. Dude goes home in 2 days. Within an hour of his departure, another prisoner will take his place, there in the same cell. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from Warren Correctional in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at Sean Swain 243-205, Warren CI, P.O. Box 120, 5787 State Route 63, Lebanon, Ohio 45036. Updates on his situation and more writings by Sean can be found at seanswain.org.
We're speaking with organizers involved in the Sabal Trail Resistance. STR is working against the Sabal Transmission Pipeline, or STP, a natural gas pipeline that is being plotted and in the process of construction in the southeast of Turtle Island through the so-called states of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Thanks a lot for taking the time to speak.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Do you all care to introduce yourselves for the audience and talk briefly about the projects that you're involved with?
Yeah, sure. My name is Karrie Ford, and I've been involved with Sabal Trail Resistance for the last number of months, having been arrested once for this and going to multiple protests and doing fundraisers and educational caravan tours to try and get more and more people involved. And this is my friend Niko.
Hey, so my name is Niko. I'm currently based in this area and have just gotten involved with the Sabal Trail Resistance just recently as around the time of the mass day of civil disobedience on January 14th, and have since been working at the Heartland camp, which is down in Bronson, and been trying to network and organize from there.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about the proposed project, the STP, and something about like the terrain and the non-human life that it's going to impact or that it threatens to impact?
Yeah, so the Sabal Trail Pipeline is an umbrella name, actually, for a group of pipelines, and they're slated to run through Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And Florida is where the gas will be burned by Florida Power and Light and also transported to Duke Energy Plant, where it will be possibly exported. Also, we need to keep in mind this pipeline can be used for whatever is wanted in the future, for oil, for example. And this pipeline is proposed to run through over 4,000 acres of forest about 2,000 wetland systems and over 700 bodies of water, including running through the Floridian Aquifer, which provides fresh drinking water to over 10 million people here in Florida. The pipeline is also passing through what's called karst terrain, which means land that is ridden with sinkholes, caverns, underground streams, springs, etc. FERC declared, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission declared that in its environmental impact statement that constructing and operating the Sabal Trail project in southwest Georgia and northern Florida could induce sinkhole development, as well as alter spring characteristics and impact local groundwater flow and quality. And yet they still persist in running this pipeline. And also due to the rapid pumping of high-pressured water and chemical mixtures being used, there are sinkholes that are forming all over Florida. We're seeing them pop up in roadways as well as out in fields within a certain mile radius of the pipeline. We also saw this happen in September of 2016 when a sinkhole opened up in Polk County in Florida and released waste from a phosphate mine that was run by Mosaic. The waste leaked into the county's aquifer, leaving their water contaminated and still not cleaned today.
You've mentioned sinkholes opening up and spills happening. In this case, what do you think are the likelihood of spills, breaks, or other environmental catastrophes that might accompany the project, like a pipeline, or this one in particular? You've talked about the sinkholes, and that seems like for any sort of stabilized long pipe that's going to be carrying pressured material, like a necessary danger. And can you talk a little bit about the Colonial Pipeline as an example in the region?
Yeah, so I feel like for me, it's like all pipelines leak. We know that, every single one of them. And each pipeline actually gets an allotted amount of leakage before it's considered a spill or before it's even recognized, like before we even see it. And anyone within a 7-mile radius of a compressor station and 3 miles of the pipeline itself are considered in the incineration zone, which is an extreme threat for the wildlife in the area as well as the humans. We're seeing the pipeline going right behind schools and through our wetlands here in Florida. And then in this case, naturally, we're dealing with a frac gas pipeline, so the major concern is that the pipeline will leak and explode, just like the Colonial Pipeline that exploded this past October. That pipeline explosion killed 7 campers and leaked over 7,000 barrels of gasoline. Also, this year so far, we've seen over 8 pipeline leaks. The last one actually just happened yesterday in Texas, and those are just the ones that we've discovered.
And I guess spanning the distances that they do, like frequently in areas that aren't immediately around the pipeline, tons of leakages could be occurring, and we wouldn't necessarily know, but it'd still be having an impact on aquifers and streams and wildlife and people's health in those areas, right?
Absolutely. Actually, sometimes it's not even discovered by their machines. Their compressor stations are supposed to be able to detect whenever there's a leak. Oftentimes, the leaks are detected or just people that are happen across the leaked area. Sometimes it's via plane, sometimes it's just people walking or boating by. Most of the time, oftentimes, the compressor stations don't even pick up the leaks.
So, according to you mentioned the FERC, according to the Federal Energy Regulation Commission's Environmental Impact Report on the STR, 83% of the populations who could be affected by a catastrophe and the construction of the pipeline are already marginalized communities that would suffer even more dire circumstances. Can you talk about who those people are and explain, for those who don't understand the dynamics of environmental racism, what that is? For instance, like intersections between race and class in the rural South?
Yeah, so I'll answer this one. So environmental racism is when environmental degradation and pollution disproportionately affect communities that are already marginalized in other ways. So in this case, you're seeing an environmental threat, that is the threat of a pipeline leaking or exploding, going through communities that are marginalized. They're predominantly Black, predominantly poor. I can speak to our own experience having driven down and seen the pipeline ourselves. It's largely in poor agricultural areas. I think this is a great example of showing that corporations, in this case, Spectra and the other corporations involved in the Sabal Trail Pipeline, are really willing to take advantage of poor white folks in addition to other people of color. It's largely going through small town agricultural areas. There's not a lot of infrastructure. There's not a whole lot of opportunity to just pick up and leave if you don't like what's going on. We passed by areas where the pipeline was passing under people's front yards. It was passing right by schools. And the environmental impact statement also mentioned that large numbers of people expressed their outrage at public meetings, but this outrage really wasn't heard. It's almost even used to the credit of FERC and the environmental impact statement and the pipeline, because they say, well, we conducted all of these public meetings and had all of this public participation, when in fact all of the public participation was local residents being outraged and expressing that outrage and just hitting a brick wall. I also just want to lastly mention Dougherty County in Georgia. I'm personally less familiar with the area where it passes through Alabama and Georgia, but there was a pretty popularized case in Dougherty County, which is a predominantly black community where the median household income is a little over $28,000 for a family of four, and 32% of the population is living below the poverty line. And the pipeline's going right through that county. So a couple of members of the Congressional Black Caucus actually wrote a letter expressing their concerns about a compressor station that's being built in Dougherty County along the pipeline. And remember that the compressor station has a blast radius of 7 miles, so it's a huge environmental risk for them. These are members of the Black Caucus who wrote a letter, and the letter was followed by a lot of lawsuits alleging environmental racism, but these concerns have not been addressed, and the environmental impact statement basically admits this, but then sort of goes on to say that it's not really a problem for whatever reason.
Another related issue, I think, that y'all brought up on the website, Sabal Trail Resistance, sabaltrailresistance.wordpress.com, I've been mispronouncing it the whole time, is, quote, the southern portion of this pipeline cuts through or into unceded territory of Seminole and Miccosukee. Is that right? Miccosukee?
Miccosukee.
Okay, I'm going to start that over. Quote, the southern portion of this pipeline project cuts into unceded territory of Seminole and Miccosukee people who fought and won, establishing an agreement with President Polk in 1845 that declared the southwestern portion of Florida was reserved for their people. There's a community of independent Indigenous people who have retained their rights by refusing federal recognition as tribal members to this day, unquote. Some of the most vocal and surprisingly visible, considering the U.S. settler colonial states' work to invisibilize them, is the resistance to recent pipeline struggles by Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America. Your article about stopping the Suwannee River crossing talks about this and about the need to decolonize, quote, our own minds and declaring solidarity with those who have stood in defiance of this manifest destiny mindset for over 500 years, unquote. Would you talk about struggle and decolonization in the Turtle Island context?
Yeah. Well, so of course, I just want to say that I am a white settler, so I just want to put that out there, and I really don't want to be talking about this as if I'm, as if I am an authority on the subject, but given the fact that we're trying to organize against this, we try and just pay as much respect and educate ourselves as much as possible. As far as I know, the land that this pipeline passes through originally belonged to the Muskogee Nation, Appalachian peoples, and countless other groups. It was only eventually came under the control of Seminole and Miccosukee tribes when those tribes were formed by northern peoples or runaway slaves who were coming to colonial Florida under Spanish rule to escape persecution. So those are the tribes that exist here today. The pipelines and other forms of environmental racism definitely continue this legacy of colonialism, where Indigenous people and other people of color are made to suffer from the consequences of white greed. And I definitely think the Seminoles are a really amazing example of this because they've never actually ceded control. They refused to sign treaties, and they waged 3 really brutal wars, the Seminole Wars in the 1800s, and fought bravely and were almost wiped out, but have demonstrated an incredible resilience to colonialism. And we're hoping that this movement is able to support them and be accountable to them as much as possible. That being said, I think one thing that's important to sort of talk about is that I think it's okay for resistance movements to sort of just get out and say, no, this isn't Indigenous-led. I think we kind of sometimes run into problems and limitations when we see Indigenous leadership as some kind of holy grail of activism. I feel like I've also been in situations where Indigenous people have been tokenized because there's this expectation that, an anti-colonial movement has to be led by Indigenous people. And that definitely comes from a really good place. And, obviously Indigenous leadership is so important. At this point, what we're really trying to do is trying to just fight for the same goals, which is ultimately to stop a genocidal and ecocidal state from destroying what's left of the land and people of Turtle Island. I want to make space for the Indigenous people who have made contributions to this movement because they are definitely present and their contributions have been valuable. I don't want to invisibilize that. So I know, Karrie, you know a little bit more about some of the Indigenous folks who have thrown down on the Sabal Trail Resistance. So I thought maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, certainly. We've had multiple Indigenous people standing up for sure. We've had folks like Bobby C. Billy, who have been to multiple meetings and protests and speeches, who have spoken out about how they do not want Sabal Trail coming through their land, as well as Betty Osceola has been to multiple of these meetings and speeches and protests. We also have Tina Elmore Wright and her husband Greg, who are the Northern Seminole peoples, and she is actually starting heartland camps. She's in strong opposition of Sabal Trail Pipeline coming through Seminole land, and it's coming right through her area of Bronson, strong and hard. It's going underneath 7 of the major roadways, pretty much enclosing them in. If they were to have an evacuation, their roadways are mostly blocked off, so it's a really scary area. But yeah, we've had multiple Indigenous people standing up, and it's possible that Betty Osceola will be starting a camp herself as well.
Can you talk a little bit, shifting real quickly, can you all talk about who's behind the pipeline project? What are the arguments for more pipeline infrastructure that they're making, and how does that jive with concerns about anthropogenic global climate change?
Yeah, so Sabal Trail Transmission is a joint venture. It's got Spectra Energy Partners, NextEra Energy, and Duke Energy Corporation that are behind it. And I feel like those of us with Sabal Trail Resistance are pretty much in strong opposition to all pipelines everywhere. And we feel it's pretty much time to move away from burning fossil fuels that cause global warming and move more towards localized energy sources such as solar and wind power. Time, I feel, we hold ourselves accountable for destroying ecosystems and feeding pockets of big corporations. I feel like, it's time to make a stand up for the environment.
So the Trump administration has just reopened the door to the construction of the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, as well as the Keystone XL pipeline. Does this action, in y'all's view, signal a big change for the federal government, or is it sort of like business as usual?
I guess I can really just give my own opinion on this. I wouldn't say this is like something that the movement has like a movement-wide stance on, so this is really just my own opinion here. I would say it's not a big change, but it's definitely scary. I think the disadvantage of having Obama in power was that people generally felt like things were okay when he was still able to push for a lot of different pipelines. But I think the advantage was that under the Obama administration, they were able to tap into this large base of liberal sympathy, which I think was unfortunately necessary to ultimately get Obama to pull the plug, or well, not really pull the plug, obviously, but give a temporary victory against these pipelines. And what's really scary now is that just seems to be drying up. Trump is definitely taking making an all-out assault on these kind of movements, especially with laws that are being proposed, legalizing running over protesters, and criminalizing doing any kind of action that would cost a business money is just going to make protest harder, and it's going to make more militant types of actions necessary if we're going to achieve any goals as far as fighting pipelines and other kinds of energy infrastructure.
An interesting thing about anti-infrastructure, anti-pipeline organizing seems to be that there are so many being proposed right now in so many different places that although it was amazing to see huge flows of people show up in like against the DAPL and against Keystone XL, now that it seems to be proliferating around a larger area, that there are more and more local struggles and points of contention that people can engage around to protect the environments around themselves. Do you see like increased engagement around people in the states that are in areas that are going to be affected by this pipeline by people that are living in there in a sort of like defend our homes perspective?
I think it's kind of hard to say, but I've definitely encountered a lot of people in kind of random places like in the supermarket or wherever being like, oh yeah, Sabal Trail's horrible. I'm doing everything I can. I think, a lot of people, especially in this era of austerity and racism, unfortunately are like, really having to prioritize themselves, which is super real. And, the number of people who are able to, get out and physically camp out is not high, and that's totally understandable. But I feel like there are a lot of people out there who are really in support of these kind of movements and increasingly supportive of direct action, definitely, and I think our biggest limitation right now is organization. It seems like there's people all over the place who are in support of this, and if we could, just get them all in one room, I think we would do a lot better.
Can you all talk about what resistance has looked like so far against the STP, and what sort of stuff is coming up and in store that you're organizing towards?
Yes. So far we've had many protests. I'm not even sure at this point how many. We've done protests at the drill sites in Swanee County, where they were drilling underneath the Swanee River. We've done protests at the Santa Fe drill site. At both of these sites where they're crossing under our Santa Fe River and our Swanee River, there have been lockdowns. At the Santa Fe was the first lockdown where a man locked himself with a U-lock to a water truck, which is necessary for the drill to pump in order to bore underneath the rivers. And then we also had two ladies who locked down with some lock boxes to a truck that was carrying drill bits at the Swanee drill site. And we've had, and the police have actually been out in full force with Sabal Trail Resistance. We've had over, I think, 21 or so arrests so far, and that's been just protesting. Some people were just protesting, some people were locking down, and some people were just on it. I hosted an educational caravan trip once, and a lady got arrested there. But we've been, doing protests at the Army Corps of Engineers office as well as our downtown areas. And they've and multiple groups are organizing in Florida, all over the state of Florida. We've also done die-ins in Tallahassee. In the future, we have planned, we have talks that are planned, as well as future protests. On the 26th, I believe it is, we have a protest at the jail that is holding Leonard Peltier. And from there, we'll be caravanning to a nearby pipeline site that's within a mile or so of the jail. And then tomorrow and the next day, we have Red Warrior Society coming. They were in Standing Rock. They're coming to do some talks at our local civic media center in Gainesville. And we have a campaign house that's opening up in Denellen, and they'll be speaking at the campaign house on the 18th.
That's awesome. How can folks get involved in the struggle? And on top of all the reasons you've given so far, why should they?
Yeah, so we certainly want more folks. I feel we're stronger together, so the more the better. And how they can get involved is, firstly, is to educate yourselves. And you can do that by going to sabaltrailresistance.com, as well as looking up Stop Sabal Trail on Facebook. We also have multiple camps that have formed. We have the Water is Life Camp and Heartland camps, as well as Sacred Water Camp. And people can get involved by just coming and plugging in. We have multiple protests that are happening all over the state of Florida, and hopefully more so in Georgia and Alabama in the future. And what do you think, Niko?
Yeah, I think the campaign house in Denellen is going to be a really good way of plugging in. That's opening up on the 18th, and that's in Denellen, Florida. The community in Denellen is also very much opposed to the Sabal Trail Pipeline, so they kind of picked that as a locus of activity, and they're going to have a whole bunch of maps up in the Denellen house showing where the pipeline's going and giving a nice and broad explanation of what all is happening. So that's going to be opening up in the next couple of days, and we're really excited about it.
We're also excited because we're going to be having, I think, the weekend of the 24th, 25th, and 26th, we're going to be having some direct action workshops, and I believe that's in the Green Swamps. So that'll be exciting. Hopefully that'll gear people up and get them energized to get more involved.
And is there...
I do believe there is a sign-up. I don't have the information on hand of how to get to that.
But I would imagine just checking out making sure to keep up on updates and new posts on sabaltrailresistance.wordpress.com is a good place to check in, yeah?
Certainly, that's a good place to get some updates.
Can you go into a little bit of detail for like you mentioned the February 26th Day of Solidarity and involving incarceration in prisons and solidarity with Leonard Peltier with resistance to the pipeline. Can you say a few words about Leonard Peltier, who he is and what he does?
Yeah, I think this is a really good example of the intersections between colonialism and pipeline infrastructure going in right now. Leonard Peltier is a long-term political prisoner who was incarcerated after a shootout in the Pine Ridge Reservation, and I believe it's been 40 years that he's been incarcerated. His trial is very widely known as to be a complete kangaroo court, and that he's incarcerated completely unjustly, but he's really been used by the government as an example of what happens when people of color, particularly Indigenous people, organize and become militant and fight against colonialist policies. So he is currently being held at FCC Coleman, which is right next to where the pipeline is going through. And I don't think this is a coincidence either, because ultimately both prisons and pipelines are going to pass through poor areas. That's the areas that that kind of infrastructure targets, because the people who get mad about it are often not able to access the same kind of resources in order to do something about it. So it's not really a coincidence that this pipeline is passing through Central Florida, a pretty poor and agricultural area, and that's also the part of Florida that has a very high concentration of prisons, and is currently where Leonard Peltier is being held.
Oftentimes projects like this are sold to, quote unquote, sold to the public as job makers, as things that'll produce like income for depressed areas, in the same way that prison construction frequently is. Like, it'll bring jobs to the community, constant source of income. Do you all know what the reality of is? Has that promise been made for this pipeline, and what the reality of the kind of jobs that it created is?
So all the research I've done so far is like only a handful of like 30 to 40, it seems, Floridians will actually have stable jobs with Sabal Trail Pipeline. But most of these, everywhere we're looking at this pipeline, we're seeing Texas plates. So basically, it's out-of-state jobs. Just come in, do some work for a while, and then they're out. We've also been seeing license plates from those in Maine, and I believe it was Arizona, but so few Florida license plates. So it's not likely that it's going to be employing a lot of Floridians here in this state. And it's actually just pulling from out-of-state workers and bringing them in to do a quick job and then leaving.
Well, thank you, Niko and Karrie, so much for taking the time to have this conversation, and I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you,
Thanks
Bert.
very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
We've just heard from Niko and Karrie from Sabal Trail Resistance about pipelines under that name threatening the environment in the southeast of Turtle Island, or so-called America. Now, here's some words from a friend at Frequenza, a podcast out of Germany, chatting with a comrade in ex-Yugoslavia about their newly published journal, Antipolitika.
All right. So we are going to make an interview with a friend of us from Antipolitika magazine, anarchist journal from the Balkans. Maybe you can just introduce this magazine, what idea was behind starting with this project, and what topics you want to keep in this.
Well, Antipolitika is a new journal which was recently started by a group of anarchists from Belgrade and Zagreb. And the idea is to do annual journal at least. So once per year we plan to publish it. Maybe in the future we will be able to do it twice per year. And the idea is to have topical issues. So the first, also what is specific about it, that we have two versions of the journal. So one is in English language and the other is in Serbo-Croatian. And the topic of the first issue is anti-militarism.
Why did you choose this name, Antipolitika? What does it mean?
Well, I think it has to do with our view of what anarchism is and how we can describe anarchist politics. We can also describe it as anti-politics, and it has to do with anarchist history and also with in the past anarchists were sometimes accused of not having a political program from a kind of a reformist perspective of politics being parliamentary politics. So sometimes anarchists actually said they were not apolitical, that they don't have politics, but they are against politics, which also can mean to be against this understanding of politics as a separate sphere of life, which is not connected to other spheres, or also something that's being dealt with by specialists. So we, in a way, this is what we are against.
Okay. So the first issue is about anti-militarism. Why did you focus on that topic for the first issue?
Well, this topic somehow formed spontaneously in a way by itself. Some of our friends were involved with it for years. And anarchists in Serbia and Croatia, somehow the scene has its roots in the 90s, and it was formed in this context of war and anti-war movement. So for this reason, it was important for some people. And now in other parts of Balkans, in Greece, there is an anti-militarist movement because the military service is still obligatory there. So now anarchists are really getting involved in this issue, and we have friends there, comrades who have court cases because they are total, they don't want to go to the army. So somehow there was the topic was interesting for us to view from a historical Yugoslav, let's say, point of view, and also to connect it to the way the movement is dealing with it now in Greece.
Okay, so you have also contacts in Greece and ex-Yugoslavia and some other parts of Balkans. If you see the region as as something that connects you in this anarchist journal, what would you say is the recent development, especially in this part of Europe, that influences the topics you write about, like recent years?
Well, I mean, the situation in the different parts of this region is quite different when it comes to the movement there, because we have Greece there, which has a really big and organized movement, and then we have the rest of the Balkans, which is quite the opposite and has also a different history. And I think the different development of the movement has a lot to do with the different history of Greece and the rest of the Balkans. But now we are somehow trying to connect ourselves more with each other and learn more about each other's experiences and politics, which is quite different. So this is also one aspect of this project, is to somehow to try to work together and to get to know each other, to also not only to translate our own texts into English, but to translate text from Greek, so they can be known, and these perspectives of the movement from Greece can be known outside of Greece, which is not often the case, because the movement is big there, but somehow it's oriented towards itself somehow. It doesn't communicate a lot with the rest of the Balkans or the world.
So you told us a little bit about how it's organized or how who is involved. Maybe you can go a little bit further. I mean, is it possible to anybody which is organized or call themselves anarchists in the Balkans to participate, or is it more like there have been contacts before and now there's a bunch of people which know them from before doing this thing?
Well, for now, somehow the way we do it is that we have an editorial group which is closed, but we plan to involve other people with every new issue. So it's possible, of course, for other people to join and to cooperate with us. We also have this, they can contact us. But for now, somehow it is a project done by like anarchist friends, and we use our these kinds of network to collaborate on it. We made this decision to make it like during the Balkan anarchist meeting in Thessaloniki in 2015, in October 2015, but in a kind of a spontaneous way. There was also an official proposal to have some kind of a collaborative project like this done by anarchists in the Balkans, and it was like a very kind of a long meeting, about maybe 6 or 7 hours with 200 people somehow trying to make a decision, and then it was going somehow slowly. In the end, it didn't even, for now, it didn't happen. But parallel to this, somehow we decided amongst ourselves, maybe we can just do this project in a kind of a easier way, collaborating with people that we know for years.
If you see in the history, there had been, I mean, like 10 years ago or something around, there had been this newspaper, Abolishing the Borders from Below, which was also in English, but it was about the whole Eastern European topic. If you compare this both, what would you say is the difference why you choose to focus on Balkans?
Well, I mean, we focus on the Balkans because we live there. That's basically the explanation. And we are interested in having anarchist perspectives on different issues developed there. And so also like where I come from Serbia, it's not a very usual thing for anarchists to like analyze different social or political issues from an anarchist perspective. This doesn't really exist as a kind of a practice. And also often these views are not very differentiated from, like, I would say, leftist views. In my opinion, like I mean, there were anarchist projects in the past, but there were a lot of them were kind of focused on translating texts and publishing texts and things like this, and also other political things, but not so much about like creating an anarchist analysis of current issues. Yeah. So this is also an attempt to make a space for kind of anarchist and radical analysis of current issues in the Balkans.
So it's mainly for people which are part of the anarchist culture or something, or is it also written to reach people like in the rest of society, or is it more like for about this internal discussions?
Well, I think it's for both. It's for ourselves, like to try to develop this thinking in a more kind of concrete way, but also to communicate with the rest of the society, of course. And in a way, it's for now on this like small scale, it's been like it's successful. People are interested in this.
So how do you spreading it at the moment?
Well, we have like our own kind of little distribution network. It can be like the Serbo-Croatian version is only now finished, so now it's being spread. We have like some alternative book fairs every month where we have it on our table. There are like it's also present in other like political spaces, bookstores, bars, and so on.
As you have an English version, and it was published in June 2016, I read, the first issue. Did you get reactions from outside of Balkans about topics that were mentioned there?
Yeah, I mean, what I can say is there is a lot of interest in it, and then we printed 500 copies of the English version, and we concluded this is not enough, so the next issue will have at least 1,000 copies. So there is a lot of interest from different parts of the world in this. Yes.
But there were also comments on some topics, like on some discussions or some perspectives, some strategies.
Well, okay, so it's only one issue now, and only one topic, which was anti-militarism, and so obviously, I mean, the way that the people from Serbia and Croatia approach this issue is more a historical one. So this is something that people are interested in, like learning this not so known history of the region, and then the way that comrades from Greece approach this issue is quite different because they're talking about things that are struggling against currently. So, but for them it was also important to learn about this history, and like one comrade who wrote a comrade from Zagreb who wrote a text about anarchist activities in the 90s. He also was a witness in a court case against one comrade who doesn't want to go, who refuses to go to the army in Greece. So also this issue was connected in that way, and that he was talking there. It was like a political event. Basically, they made a political event out of the trial. They talked about the politics of war in the 90s, the connections of the Greek state, and so on.
Thanks a lot for letting us participate in all these topics raised in this newspaper, and good luck in the future.
More from our friends at Frequenza. The Anarchistischer podcast can be found at frequenza.noblogs.org.
You're listening to WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, North Carolina. This is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show can also be heard on KWTF in Bodega Bay, California, KOWA in Olympia, Washington, WCRS in Columbus, Ohio, and KWRK in Fairbanks, Alaska. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you are interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email so we know you're doing it. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus new releases, and a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.